Australia's most senior health official insists the country did have a plan for coronavirus outbreaks in aged care. The minister responsible, Aged Care Minister Richard Colbeck, this is in charge of privately run nursing homes, has also disputed claims the sector was not given enough advice to handle the pandemic. But I've got a few questions to ask. If, of course, the minister would make himself available, why, if you're the Minister for Aged Care, did you find out 5 days after residents in St Basil's in Melbourne were infected with COVID-19? 5 days after the infection. Who decided it was a precedent to send COVID-infected patients to hospital? Why did we have 104 aged care facilities non-compliant after inspections during March to May, given we knew how devastating the virus would be in February of this year? Why did it take 3 deaths and then another 6 days before we tested all residents in the Dorothy Henderson Lodge in Macquarie Park? It's a shambles. Let's bring in Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell to discuss this and more. Andrew, is he serious? There are so many holes in what he is saying today.
Well, I think it's a big challenge from the federal government. It was interesting to see this afternoon as well the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, muscle up and essentially have a go at what counsel assisting the Royal Commission had said on aged care. He disputed the fact Australia was in the worst position of any country in terms of aged care deaths. He said we'd had 220 and 16,000 were in the UK and 50,000 in the US. And he also disputed the account of events which suggested that there was no plan on aged care. He said it was part of other plans. But I don't think this is just going to go away. Having said that, it is interesting to see a Scott Morrison appointed Aged Care Royal Commission in conflict with the government at the moment. And where is that going to end up? Is the Royal Commission going to find something the government just doesn't agree with? You don't normally see that kind of thing, so some tense days ahead for that particular relationship.
Very true, and what's happening while they're making comments on all of this is the Aged Care Royal Commission and evidence about the lack of preparedness in various aged care facilities, including the fact that we've had 5 agencies working in single aged care facilities like the one in Penrith in Sydney at Newmarch. Here was the CMO's response today.
We have been planning for our aged population as a vulnerable group since the beginning of our planning in relation to COVID-19. The first reports out of China in January, which led to the formulation of the Australian Health Sector Emergency Response Plan for novel coronavirus, which is here and was launched by the Prime Minister in early February, makes very specific mention of those vulnerable groups.
Andrew, again, I'm hearing what he says. They obviously did have a plan, but when you have, in Victoria, lost 70% of those who died from coronavirus because they were in aged care, it doesn't say much for your plan.
There seems to be a culture in the Morrison government that comes from the top, Chris, and that is to not accept blame for anything and to not accept fault for anything. And they need to be very careful with that. Most Australians would forgive them for making the odd mistake in this crisis when they've handled a number of decisions around closing international borders, etc. well. They got the states to reopen before they wanted to, which helped the economy. They made the right call on JobKeeper. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you could have done things better. And I think we need to see a bit more of that from the government rather than it's the state's faults or someone else's fault. And I'll be interested to see where this particular issue goes because it's a hard one to get out of. Perhaps lucky for the government, Richard Colbeck is in the Senate, so he's not going to come under the blowtorch to the extent that you might in the House. I remember Bronwyn Bishop 20 years ago hitting the fence as aged care minister over a similar sort of crisis. But it means the PM will come under scrutiny in the House in a couple of weeks on this issue. The opposition's finally got something to latch onto here.
Meanwhile, we thought Anastasia Palaszczuk was being very, very strict in terms of the Queensland-New South Wales border, but the Northern Territory border restrictions could remain in place for another 18 months, according to Michael Gunner, the Chief Minister. And they're using this as obviously a campaign strategy as their election approaches. What can you tell us?
Well, it's like the Pacific solution, except it's in the Northern Territory just about for everyone outside, isn't it? I mean, he's using it as his main campaign tactic in the election in a week and a half's time. It's fascinating because I've been told today that the Labor Party's seeing this as a precursor to the Queensland campaign. They've got a television ad saying the CLP would have opened the borders too early. If they were in government, they haven't got the experience. They won't keep you safe. You can't trust them. The same tricks are going to be used by Anastasia Palaszczuk and her campaign team against Deb Frecklington in September, October. And I think it could be repeated again in WA. So the state borders, unfortunately for those who want to move between them, it's the biggest political football since asylum seekers at the moment. When we look at these 3 state and territory campaigns coming up, I think they'll be mirror images of each other, and I think it will favour the incumbent because ultimately people do not want this virus.
Yep, they look at their own health, their own selfishness, and that's what they vote for. The funny thing is the Northern Territory Tourism Board is actually advertising on radio and television right now to attract people to the Northern Territory. Come and see the top end, they say. What? In 2 years' time?
I saw one of those ads and I did find it perplexing. Look, Michael Gunner, he might have overshot the mark with the 18 months. You could see them rowing back. They want them shut, maybe not that long, but essentially the issue as a whole is going to be a benefit for him in the election Saturday week.